Hello, my name is James Sanderson, and I'm the Evangelism Minister here at the Brown Street Church of Christ in Waxahachie, Texas. And I thank you for being with us today. We are going through a series, Equipping the Church to Evangelize in this ever-changing 21st century. So, as we get started today on this subject of evangelism, trying to prepare us to get out here and reach the lost, I hope you have a Bible with you. Always have a Bible with you. I hope you have a pen so you can take some notes. And I hope you also have a copy of this workbook. Now, I believe this will be helpful for you. And all the studies that we are going through in this series is found in this workbook that I put together. It's entitled Saving Souls in the 21st Century. Now, again, this workbook is not a substitute for the Bible. It is only to help lead people to the Bible. It has over 800 printed verses. It also has another 900 references to verses that are found in the Bible. So there's a lot of Bible within this workbook. It's not just me talking. We have went through chapter 1. Chapter 1 is reaching the lost, and that's on page 3. That was to motivate us as Christians to go out and reach people for Jesus. Okay? And hopefully we've already been doing that. Now in that chapter, we have a prayer list. This prayer list is specifically for people for their salvation. A lot of times we pray for everything for people but their salvation. And yet, if you had the best health, all the money in the world, the best job, best marriage, but you don't have Jesus when you leave this earth, you're going to be in trouble. So we want to pray for people specifically for their salvation. So keep putting names on this list, people you live next to, neighbors, family members, co-workers, whoever God has put in your world that you don't believe is right with God, put them on this list and pray for them every day. And that's going to change you and how you approach them. It's also going to help involve God in their lives. Now, once we've done all that, we've got a person that we're ready to study with, right? The question is, where do we take them? And that's going to bring us to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is leading someone to Christ. Now, in this chapter here, there are 6 different studies, and hopefully by the end of that study, that person is going to become a Christian. But here's what happens so many times. As we're trying to lead somebody to Christ, they stop us and say, wait a minute, I've got questions. I've got other questions. And so many times, if we don't do a good job of answering these questions, we could lose that Bible study, and the Bible study's over. So that's why this workbook is designed the way it is. So we're going to take them over to chapter 5. And here's the question that our students are asking. How can I trust what I'm reading? How do I know that this Bible is the real deal? How do I know it's from God? And that is found on page 103, Trusting My Version of the Bible. How we got the Bible. How was it put together? Now, I got to let you know that this study has been modified. It's been changed. I went in and done hopefully a lot better job than I had before. So if this study comes out a little bit different than it is in your older workbooks, I've got a newer workbook that has this in it. Don't panic. It's still on the same basis, but I think this is going to come out a lot better. So watch and see what you think. So as we begin to study with people, some will inform us that they do not trust the Bible. I've had many encounters with people that said this. Many make statements like, how can we truly know that the Bible is from God and not some man-made writings and beliefs? It's a good question. Others will ask, how can we trust the Bibles we have today knowing that they have been translated so many times? Has man corrupted the Bibles we have today? Now, if you're asking these questions or questions like them, I ask you to put the Bible to the acid test. And I just got to tell you, have you ever asked this question even as a Christian? Oh, I have. Sure do. So this may not be a study just for the person you're studying with, but this also may be for you as a Christian. So let's get into this. Let's talk about this acid test. What are we talking about here? Well, here you got a couple different coins, and you see some little dots here, okay? And they are putting some acid on these coins to see if these coins are legitimate or not. That's the acid test. So a severe trial is something called an acid test. This term originated during times when gold was widely circulated. Nitric acid was applied to an object of gold to see if it was genuine or not. If it was fake, the acid decomposed it. If it was genuine, the gold was unaffected. When dealing with our Bibles today, the same test must be applied to see if it will hold up to the test of being genuine. And isn't that what we're looking for? Is the Bible that we have today genuine? So there's a gold. Putting that nitric acid on there to see if it decomposes or changes color. And if it doesn't, then we got the real deal. And that's what we're after, right? We're after that pure gold. We're after the genuine stuff. All right? So let's talk about our Old Testament. Let's start with our Old Testament. You know, the Bible's split into two different sections, Old and New Testaments. Let's talk about the Old Testament and how was it put together. So let me share some facts of the Old Testament. It was originally written in Hebrew, okay, because it was written to the Jews. And then later on, some was written in Aramaic. Okay, you'll see this in the book of Ezra and the book of Daniel. And then later, as the Jewish people returned from slavery in Babylon, so in about 586 BC, they were taken away. So you'll find this in the book of Daniel. They were taken away. They were in Babylon. They started to learn different language. Then they were brought back. And so many lost the Hebrew language. And so the Old Testament was later on translated into Greek, okay? The modern language of the day. Now this translation is known as the Septuagint version of the Old Testament, okay? So here's the Old Testament history. It was originally written in Hebrew, a little bit in Aramaic, and then eventually translated into Greek. And so there's your Hebrew. You can't read that, can you? Me either. Here's some Aramaic. And then later on in the Greek, which is the Septuagint. Today, we have no original copies of the Old Testament in our possession. Okay, so we don't have any originals. Here we are, we're trying to see if this is genuine or not. It was the scribes' practice during Old Testament times when they made a new copy of the Old Testament, they would destroy the old one. Thus, the older copies are no longer with us today, and this has caused some to doubt the reliability of our Old Testament. Now, for those that doubt, before these doubts set in, a person should first consider the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay? And we've talked about this in other studies that I've done. So here's the Dead Sea Scrolls. All right? So up until 1947, the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest copies that we had of the Old Testament were dated about 90 AD. Okay? All right? Now Jesus came in about 4 BC. He died in about 29 AD. And so the oldest copies that we have were after Jesus came to this earth, died, buried, was raised, and went back to heaven. Since these copies were dated after the life of Jesus, many claim that the prophecies made about Jesus in the Old Testament were added to the text after his life and not prophesied before. What they're saying is that, we got all these prophecies about Jesus in the Old Testament, right? It tells about his birth, he's going to be born of a virgin, he's going to come during the Roman Empire, it's going to tell about his crucifixion, his resurrection. All that stuff was written before, but you know what? If our older copies were after, the oldest copies we have is after his death, People just think they just wrote all that in about Jesus. And so that makes the Old Testament fraudulent. Okay? So some doubt that. Well, here's the Dead Sea. And you can see there's no fish in it. Okay? A lot of minerals, as you can see, the deposits along the seashore there. These are the caves that are found around the Dead Sea. There's a bunch of them. Well, one day in about 1947, a little boy was up and he threw a rock inside of that cave. And when he threw it up, it made it sounded like glass breaking. Okay, so he's like, "Oh, what was that?" So he climbed up there, and when he got up there, he found these jars, these clay jars. This is what he broke. Well, what was in these clay jars? Manuscripts of the Bible, the Old Testament. And here's all the spots around the Dead Sea. You can see where Jerusalem is over here at the top. So it's just a little bit south and west or east of Jerusalem. And here's the different places that they have found all these copies of the Old Testament, like copies of Genesis, copies of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, all these Old Testament books that wrote about Jesus. So the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls shows evidence to destroy this theory that Jesus was just written in after, not before. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain all the Old Testament books of the Old Testament except for the book of Esther. What is amazing about these copies of the Old Testament is that they match our copies of 90 AD perfectly. That's pretty impressive. They also hold within them all the prophecies of Jesus. Within these writings, we are also able to identify who these writings were attributed to. They were attributed to the Essenes because there were other writings found within these writings, and they have the Essenes on it. Okay, so the Essenes lived between about 400 and 250, maybe even a little bit beyond that, BC. Okay, now that's an important fact because it helps us date those Old Testament writings of the Dead Sea, placing them at least 250 years prior to Jesus' arrival to earth, not after. Therefore, this proves that the prophecies about Jesus were written in the Old Testament hundreds of years before he lived on this earth, not after. So that destroys that theory for those people that are doubting. So there's the cross. Jesus comes to earth about 4 BC. The oldest copies are about 90 AD. The Dead Sea Scrolls was found in 1947, and they point back to about between 408 and maybe even can stretch as much as 104 BC. Again, showing that these things were written about Jesus before he got here, not after. Destroys that theory of doubt. Here's another one. The Old Testament is historically accurate. Okay, that's important. Because we've all had fables or stories or fairy tales read to us, right? So another fact that helps us trust the Old Testament is that it is historically accurate. The Old Testament writes about many events and people that were all written in other historical writings of that time. For instance, the historian Herodotus confirms events of the Babylonians and Medo-Persian kingdoms that coincide with the Old Testament. So right behind me on my bookshelf here, I have the book of Herodotus. You go through and you're reading through the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 5, you see the Babylonians, and then the Medo-Persians come in and they took the town of Babylon, right? The writing on the wall of this story that is told in chapter 5. Well, that story and its detail is written about by Herodotus, the historian. And when you take the Bible and you match up with what history says, they match up perfectly. Okay? So it's not like history saying one thing And then the Bible's saying something totally different. Because that would be a fairy tale. That would just be a made-up story. No, history is connecting perfectly with the Bible. They're on the same page. Writing of Egyptian priests found in Egyptian history tell of some of the plagues and the parting of the Red Sea that the Old Testament writes about. Okay, so we are looking in one of my videos. It talks about the crossing of the Red Sea. If we can find Mount Sinai. Well, we were in the beginning of that video. We're actually looking for the Pharaoh that talked to Moses. Okay. Now, when you find this Pharaoh, it's going to say in Egyptian history how he died. He died by pouring of water. What does the Bible say? He died at the bottom of the Red Sea. Pouring of water? That's how he died? Yeah. He's also the only Pharaoh that never had a tomb. Well, that makes sense. If his body floated down the Red Sea, we never found him. You don't have a tomb? That makes sense, doesn't it? All the other pharaohs had tombs. And then you have this Egyptian priest who lived during the same time as this pharaoh. And he writes about the plagues of Egypt. Remember the plagues of Egypt, right? Nile turned to blood. That's in Egyptian history, written by an Egyptian priest. He says that there was 3 days of darkness. That's one of the plagues that Moses brought down on Egypt. And he writes that there were also that the firstborn of every Egyptian household died in one night, and that they filled the Nile and all the tombs with their bodies. That fits perfectly with the Bible. So again, you see here that history and the Bible are matching. And then in the 1950s, this was one of the things that was used against the Bible, is the Hittites. The Bible mentions the nation of the Hittites. Talks about them quite a bit in the Old Testament. But up until 1950, all the archaeologists were like, we have found nothing on the Hittites. We don't have any evidence that they ever existed. No writings, nothing in history. So your Bible's false. But then in the 1950s, guess what happened? They found all kinds of historical evidence about the Hittites, that they really actually existed. So again, one more time, the Bible and history match. They do not contradict each other. Okay? So this and much more proves the Old Testament writings are accurate, and they tell us about real people and real events. Other writers of the Old Testament also confirm the Bible. You got Daniel, you got Jeremiah, you got David who wrote most of the Psalms, you got First Kings, right? You got all these different people writing in the Old Testament, and they lived over a period of many, many hundreds of years. So the Old Testament writers also support and confirm each other. Okay? The prophet Daniel confirms the prophet Jeremiah. We'll see this in Daniel and in Jeremiah. The prophet Isaiah tells of events that took place in the time of Daniel and Ezra, hundreds of years before they actually happened. That's interesting. Hosea talks about David. Jeremiah tells of events involving Moses and Samuel. And Nehemiah tells stories about Joshua, sometimes hundreds of years after the events. Can't think of this. These writers didn't live at the same time, and they didn't even know each other. This should show us that the writers of the Old Testament were in perfect sync with each other. They did not contradict or tell opposing sides of the same stories. Let's look at some examples here. So here you have a timeline, okay? So we know that there was a prophecy that in 70 years, or for 70 years, the Israelites are going to be taken away into slavery. That's prophesied in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 21, 25, and chapter 29. Now, that confirmation is going to be pointing to 635, and it's going to be found in Daniel chapter 9. So here's a prophecy made, okay, 70 years. And then we're going to see that another writer confirms confirms that that's exactly what happened. Let's see. So the two are going to be confirming each other. Jeremiah is going to be pointing to Daniel, and Daniel is going to be pointing back to Jeremiah. They're going to confirm each other. Okay? So here's Jeremiah. He says, "This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you," this is the Israelites, "and fulfill my gracious promise to bring you back to this place." You guys are coming back to Jerusalem. Okay? Now that is written in 605 BC. That's the first deportation of the Israelites. Daniel chapter 9 verse 2, "In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood from the scriptures, according to the word of the Lord given to who? Jeremiah." So what's Daniel reading? Jeremiah, the prophet, that the desolation of Jerusalem would last 70 years. And he's looking at his sundial going, time's up. 70 years are done. And then he starts to pray, God, let us go back home. And in 535 BC, they went back home. There's your 70 years. Confirmation. Now let's talk about somebody else. Let's talk about Isaiah here. Now, he lived in 722 BC. Okay? He is going to make a prophecy that's going to point to also the year 535 BC. And we're going to find this in the book of Ezra. Now, that's quite a gap, isn't it? Okay? It's almost 200 years. So let's see what he says. So we're going to see that Isaiah is pointing to something that Ezra is going to talk about and Daniel is going to talk about. And Ezra and Daniel are going to be pointing back to something that Isaiah talked about. They're going to confirm each other. So here's Isaiah. "Who says of Jerusalem, it shall be inhabited? Of the towns of Judah, they shall be built. And of their ruins, I will restore them." I find this interesting. When Isaiah is writing this, because he dates the book, he tells what kings are alive when he's writing. That's in the first chapter, which is about 722 BC. Jerusalem is fine. It has not been destroyed. Okay? And yet, who shall say, let it be rebuilt? Right? "Who says of the watery deep be dry, and I will dry up your streams?" Verse 28. "Who says of," what's his name? Cyrus. "He's my shepherd, and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt." And again, in Isaiah's time, it's like it doesn't need to be rebuilt. It's perfectly fine. "And of the temple, let its foundations be laid." Temple, it's fine. That was in 722 BC. Now what's going to happen? In 586 BC, okay, remember you're going forward towards the cross, so your numbers are going down. In 586 BC, that temple is going to be destroyed. Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, and the Israelites are going to be taken away for 70 years. Now you're in the book of Ezra. In the first year of who? Of Cyrus. Cyrus. Who's Cyrus? Isaiah was talking about Cyrus. He named Cyrus 200 years before the guy was born. He named him before his grandfather was born. By name. Cyrus will say, let it be rebuilt. Here's King Cyrus. Now, 200 years later, here's King Cyrus of Persia. In order to fulfill the word of the Lord. Who? The Lord. Spoken by who? Jeremiah. He's pointing back to the book of Jeremiah. Or point, back to Jeremiah, right? Because Jeremiah said in 70 years, I'll bring it back, right? The Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and to put it in writing. And this is what Cyrus, king of Persia, said. You guys can go home. You guys can rebuild. We're going to give you money. The temple's going to be rebuilt. The city's going to be rebuilt. Wow. You see the two confirming each other? I mean, we got Jeremiah here, we got Isaiah here, and we've got Ezra here, and Daniel will also do the same thing. Amazing. Are you starting to see that this Bible is much different than any other book in the world? And that's what you've got to convey to your students so they can trust this Bible, so we can get back into that Bible study and lead them to Christ. It's important. So he was pointing back 539 BC. So summary. Therefore, the Old Testament holds up to the acid test, and this should tell us that we can trust its writings. But what about other writings? What about writings that are in Old Testament times, but they didn't make the Bible? They didn't actually get into the Bible. Like the Apocrypha. Now, this is the Apocrypha. You can find it here. You got Book of Tobit, Judith, 1st, 2nd Maccabees. You got 2 extra chapters, chapter 13 and 14 of Daniel. You can find this in the Catholic Bibles that we have today. I got 4 Catholic Bibles right behind me on my shelf here. Okay, and you can find these extra books. Well, it made it in the Catholic Bible, but it's not in the Bibles we have today. What about writings of these and others? What about other writings that did not make the canon of the Old Testament, books like the Apocrypha? Some claim that books like these should also be included in the Bible and are inspired by God. The books of the Apocrypha were written during the Old Testament period. 2 of these books, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, are unique in the fact that they are very historically accurate, even fulfilling some of the prophecies that are found in Daniel chapter 8 and chapter 10 and 11. Yet, despite this fact, there are problems with these books. First of all, the writers of the biblical canon did not quote from or confirm these books of the Apocrypha. So you didn't find Jeremiah or Isaiah or Moses or any other writers in the Old Testament actually referring back to these books. We just don't have that, okay? Which is much different from the Old Testament books that we have. Secondly, only 3 of these 7 books of the Apocrypha were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which leaves 4 that is missing, along with the 2 extra chapters of Daniel, which is chapters 13 and 14. So they weren't even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, okay? Also, the apocryphal writings that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls don't match the apocryphal writings we have today, unlike the Old Testament. The Old Testament matched up perfectly, but these other writings, they didn't match the ones that were in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And thirdly, the apocryphal books were not as widely distributed as the Old Testament writings were, and were not recognized as being inspired writings by the Jews. They didn't recognize these books. And finally, to even further prove that these books do not belong in the Bible, in 1st Maccabees chapter 4, verse 46, Maccabees writes about his own hand that they were looking for a prophet, but none could be found. And see, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for people who are genuine prophets of God. So when they speak God's words, okay? They are speaking God's words, not their own ideas, not their own opinions. We're looking for inspired prophets of God. Maccabees, he writes, going, we can't find a prophet. What does that tell you? That tells you that Maccabees, with his own pen, just told the whole world, I'm not a prophet. So even though these books are historically accurate, Maccabees 1 and 2, even tell some of the events that were found in the Old Testament, that does not make them inspired by God. And so for those reasons, they do not belong in the Old Testament. What I'm saying is they didn't pass the acid test. Are you seeing that? You got to put these books to the test. The ones that pass the test, they get in the Bible. The ones that don't, they don't belong in the Bible. And these books don't. Therefore, the books of the Apocrypha, and others like it, do not pass the acid test as being genuinely inspired by God, and thus do not hold up like the rest of the Old Testament books we have today. Now, let's move to the New Testament. We're only going to go through a little bit of this, and then we'll catch up the rest of it on the second study. So now let's talk about the New Testament. Now let's share some facts about the New Testament. The New Testament was originally written in the Greek language and was written between about 45 and 79 AD. We have no complete original writings of the New Testament in our possession today, just like the Old Testament. The first fragments we have could date back as early as 54 AD. We have a copy of the book of the Gospel of John, and it used to be at the University of Michigan. I'm not sure if it's still there or not, but I've seen it with my own eyes. So I used to live in Ann Arbor, that's where I was born, and it dated back to 200 AD, believed to be the third copy of the book of John. The first complete copies that we have of the New Testament in our possession today date back to about 350 to 510 AD. Now that's going to leave a gap of about 270 years between the originals and the first completed copies that we have in our possession today. So, there's a New Testament originally written. Our first completed copies, 350 to 510 AD. We got some pieces, partial copies, partial pieces. They could go back as early as 54 AD. And here is, again, some of Paul's writings that dated between 200 and 250. Okay? And you can find these scattered throughout the world. But that's about all that we have. Okay? Despite us not having any of the original copies of the New Testament, which puts doubts in people's minds, we do have about 5,500 copies in the Greek of the Old Testament, or of the New Testament. There is not any writing of ancient times that has been copied as much as the New Testament. I mean, nothing that's even close, which shows the importance of these writings. Now, you take those 5,500 Greek copies that we have, you lay them all out in a room, okay? 85% of them are 100% exact. That's amazing. What if I asked you to go home and write down the New Testament, see if you wouldn't make any mistakes, right? I mean, 85% are spot on. Now, that only leaves 15% of these copies that are in dispute. And of these copies that are in dispute, most of them are just a few letters off. Like one may have an S on it. It got a plural instead of a singular, okay? And we can go back and we can see where the changes were, and we make those changes. But even with that 15%, it doesn't change the things that pertain to eternal life or the other basic fundamentals of the Bible. Even with the disputes, it doesn't change the major themes of the Bible. Okay? So, this was all the Greek copies that we have. These are the centuries that we have, and all the copies. And you can see, the hundreds of copies that we have. Actually, 5,500. Now, what happens is when a scribe would get this, and he'd get a copy, and then he would copy it, and then the other scribe would copy it. Sometimes you see this little box here in the red. See, the original would say the only Son of God. Well, this scribe, he made a mistake. He left out a word, the Son of God. And then a couple guys got a hold of that later on, and they translated it the same way he did. So they put the mistake in. And then those guys made those mistakes somebody else gets those copies, and then they go in and they make the mistake. What we can do today is scholars can take all the 5,500 manuscripts and they can lay them out, date them all, and then say, hey, it was this way, it was this way, it was this way, and then all of a sudden somebody changed it. There was a mistake made in it. And then a couple other guys got a hold of that, made the mistake, and then they got a hold of it, made the mistake, and they could see where the mistake is. And then in our newer translations of the Bible today, we can go back and fix those and go, that's not the way it was in the original. Okay? And so scholars have done a lot of work to show where some changes were made or some mistakes were made, and they can correct that. So I think that's pretty cool. Now, that's part one of how this Bible was put together. I hope this is helpful for you so that you can take this and show other people that you can trust this Bible. I not only have the work in English, but I also have it in Spanish. The English copies are $15. The Spanish copies are $10. I also have a DVD video. This shows me actually sitting across the table. There's 4 DVD discs in here. It's 12 hours of material. Me sitting across the table, trying to study with somebody, using the workbook and the Bible to lead them to Christ, or couples. And then there's also a thumb drive that I have. And this thumb drive is also $15. And it has all the PowerPoints that you just seen of the workbook. Everything I have in evangelism. Everything I have on just all kinds of things. Acts, Romans, my sermons, everything, all on PowerPoints. All for you to help young preachers or other people to get out there and plug these things in a TV and have a Bible study with somebody, just to help you to further reach people. If you are interested in that, you give me a call. You can also get on my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and plug in Saving Souls in the 21st Century. There's over 200 videos on there by James Sanderson. If you see this picture, these are the newer videos. If you see this picture, this is the older videos. Just a lot to choose from. You can send this to people. You can send them overseas. Put them in an email. Put them in a text. Say, hey, watch this video. Anything to help lead people to Jesus. I also do evangelism workshops. Here's a list of these workshops or lectureships or conferences. This is both past and upcoming workshops. The ones in the black here are ones that are going on this year that I've either done or ones I have scheduled for next year. And so there's just a list. I would love to come and have a workshop and help your congregation to go out and reach the lost. So those are the many workshops that I've done. And if you want to get a hold of me, you can go to saginawpreacher@yahoo.com. My website is www.savingsoulstoday.com. If you're overseas and you need a copy of this workbook, you can just print it out. It's all yours for free. Or you can contact me at the Brown Street Church of Christ at 972-937-8855. It was great being with you today. This is only part one. Let's get into part two next time and really look at our different translations in the English. Let's finish out that New Testament, see how we got the New Testament and the confirmations that we have. And let's answer these people's questions so we can know that this Bible can be trusted. God bless you. Just know that these videos are done because I love you. We're just trying to lead people to Jesus. Hey, we'll see you next time. God bless you.